Hi everyone, welcome to Tripp Advisor. It is Tuesday today, so that means it's time for another Tabletop Tuesday board game tutorial and review. Today we're going to be starting a series, looking at a series of games related to the theme of travel. Of course, with the COVID pandemic still ravaging our world, it makes travel a little more difficult, especially as we get into the spring and summer season. Many of us are looking forward to traveling, but we're having to adjust our travel plans. So I've got a few board games on my shelf here that are travel themed. So they involve literal travel, or they sort of give the feel that you're traveling to distant lands around the world, or in some cases beyond, in a galaxy far, far away. So today we're going to be kicking off, and for the next few weeks we'll be focusing on games with travel themes. And I thought a perfect place to start would be with probably the travel theme game that is most well known and has been most popular over the years. It spawned a number of spin-off games. We're going to be looking at the popular award-winning game Ticket to Ride. I'll be looking at the Ticket to Ride Europe version, the second one that was produced. And so, hey, all aboard. We'll take it to the table. I'll show you how it works, and then we'll come back up and I'll give some final thoughts.
All aboard!
All right, here is Ticket to Ride Europe version outside the box on the table. I'll just show you briefly all the components and then we'll get to the setup. So you've got the board, good size board here, which is basically simply a map of Europe. All of the major cities in play in the game are signified by these sort of orange dots around the board. For example, here you've got Marseille, France, and Rome, and Munich. So you've got them stretching from Portugal all the way over to basically Eastern Europe. You've got two decks of cards in the box as well. The majority of the cards form this deck, this blue back deck, and if you flip these over, you'll see basically there are train cards corresponding to the different colors on the different routes you're going to be connecting throughout the course of the game. So a variety of colors and a few of these sort of wild card sort of rainbow trains sprinkled in. More on those as we get to the gameplay shortly. There's one deck of cards there. Another deck of cards you'll see in the box are these ticket cards, brown back ticket cards, and on the back side of those it'll simply have two cities, and that means your objective or your goal throughout the game is to make a connection from one city to another. Game plays 2 to 5 players, so it comes with 5 different colors: black, blue, red, yellow, and green. And so in each of the bags you'll have, I'll open up the red one here to show you. Basically you simply got these plastic train tokens, and you'll also have a few of these train stations as well. I'll explain those when we get to the gameplay. And the last component, you've got 5 color-coded, corresponding to the colors in play in the game, 5 color-coded scoring tokens, and so you'll just move those around the board as you complete destinations throughout the course of the game, tracking the score as you go. That's all the components of Ticket to Ride. Let's get to the setup now. Okay, here's the setup for Ticket to Ride Europe. A pretty basic setup. It doesn't take a lot of time to set up the game. I'm simulating a 4-player game, so I've got the colors yellow, red, blue, and black distributed. You're going to want to distribute 3 of these ticket cards to each player, and 4 of the blue train cards to each player. You'll keep those hidden at the start of the game. You're also going to want to put the corresponding colors to the scoring track. You start those at 0, and throughout the course of the game you'll be tracking the score around the perimeter of the board. Also, these train cards here, you will shuffle them, put them in a stack, and you're going to reveal the top 5 cards in play to set up. Throughout the game you'll be replenishing those 5 cards as they are chosen. One final thing to do before the game starts: each player will look at their 3 ticket cards You won't reveal them to the other players, but you will look at your destinations on the backside. Those are going to be your overarching objectives throughout the course of the game, and you must keep at least 2. You can keep all 3. If you keep 2, you simply secretly discard the third one. Nobody sees what it was. Put that in the box or out of play for the remainder of the game. The remaining ticket cards will remain in your possession throughout the game. Keep the train cards in hand, hold them like a regular deck of cards, and you'll be accumulating those and using those throughout the course of the game. And that's the setup. All right, having set up the game, let's take a few minutes to look at the gameplay, the game flow, beginning with the starting player. And it's suggested that the starting player is the person who's traveled to the most European countries. They are given 4 options, 4 choices on their turn. And remember, the overarching objective of the game is to score as many points as possible. Points are accumulated by connecting routes, building from one city to another, and also connecting your ticket destinations. At the beginning of the game, everyone's given 2 or 3 of these. For example, in this case, I have the destination Smolensk to Rostov over here on the eastern side of the board. And if I'm able to complete one city to the other, going any direction I want, as long as there's a uninterrupted flow of trains connecting from one city to the other, I will get, in this case, 8 points at the end of the game. I should note as well that any destinations I don't complete at the end of the game, I will lose that many points. And so you want to be making connections basically anywhere throughout the board you choose, but usually the connections you're making are working towards completing these destinations on your ticket cards. So let's talk about the 4 choices that are available to each player on their turn. More often than not, you will be choosing to accumulate some of these train cards and adding them to your hand. Again, you keep that hand secret. Nobody else will know exactly what colors you have in your hand, although it's important to take note of the colors that other players are collecting throughout the course of the game. When you choose to choose train cards on your turn, you can choose, more often than not, you're choosing 2 train cards. I'm either choosing 2 from the 5 that are available face up, or you can choose 2 off the top of the face down deck here. The only exception is when you choose to grab one of these locomotive wild cards you see here that have sort of the rainbow on them. They can be used to be any color. They're more powerful. So if I choose to draw that on my turn, I only get 1 instead of 2 cards. Of course, if the top card I draw here is a locomotive card, nobody knows I drew the locomotive, so I still get to take a second draw. I can take 2 the same colors. In this case, I could take 2 red. I could take 2 different colors. I could choose to draw 1 off the top of the deck, and my second one, except for the locomotive, of course, I can draw from here, or I can draw 2 from the face down deck. So in this case, if it's my turn, perhaps I want to double up on red, so I can choose to draw 2 of these red cards. As soon as the cards are drawn here, actually as soon as the first one is drawn, I should be replenishing them. You always want to have 5 revealed for the next player's turn. So I'll replace those 2 I drew, and then it would go to the player to my left for them to choose what they want to do. So that's how drawing train cards works. You'll be doing that more often than not on your turn. However, of course, at different points during the game, you'll want to claim routes on the board. And so I can choose, rather than drawing cards on my turn, I can choose to claim a route. So for example, as I mentioned, I'm looking at getting from Smolensk over here down to Rostov. And there's a step starting at Smolensk that goes to Kiev requiring 3 red cards. Having chose 2 red cards on my last turn, if it comes around to me again, I can choose to claim that route by cashing in 3 red cards here. I have 3 red cards in my hand. Of course, I could have 2 red cards and one of the locomotive cards. I could have 3 locomotive cards if I want. So you'll just put those off to the side, forming a discard pile. And then to signify that I've claimed that route, I'll take in this case I'm playing red. I will put 3 red train cards, claiming the route from Smolensk to Kiev. And then I'll go over here to legend, and because that was a length of 3, that gets me 4 points. So I'll immediately take the red token and bump it up to a score of 4. That's how claiming routes works. And then again, depending on how long the route is, you just give the appropriate score to the player who claimed the route on their turn. So that's how drawing cards works. That's how claiming routes works. There is another option, potentially through the game. If later in the game, if I've completed all of my current destination cards and I want to grab some more, you can choose more destination cards on your turn. You started with 3 at the start of the game, keeping at least 2. Every time you grab new ticket cards, you will grab 2 of them, and you must keep at least 1 of them. Of course, there's some risk and reward to that. If the game ends again and you aren't able to complete all of your tickets, all the incomplete ones, you will lose points corresponding to the number on the card. But the more destinations you're able to complete, the more bonus cards you will get as well. It's important also to keep an eye on how many trains you have left during the course of the game. As you're claiming routes and working towards your destinations, each player only has 45 train cards. And so you want to make sure you have the ability to complete all of your steps. It has happened occasionally with us where you're making plans to get somewhere, but you simply run out of train cards. You don't have enough to get there. So keep an eye on that as you're claiming your routes and collecting your train cards throughout the course of the game. So that's the third option, is drawing more destination tickets to add to your hand, drawing 2, keeping at least 1. And finally, the final option is building one of these train stations. And these are unique to the Ticket to Ride Europe version. Those of you who have played the basic North American Ticket to Ride, it's the same game except there aren't any train stations. Also, there aren't any tunnels, and we'll talk about tunnels shortly, and there aren't any ferries. We'll talk about those shortly. But let's talk about building this station. Let's say, for example, another player around the table, let's say the yellow player, really wants to get to Kiev. But throughout the course of the game, all of the access points into Kiev have been built by different players. They can choose to build a station in Kiev which allows a second color to come or to go from one access point into Kiev. The reality is that once I built this from Smolensk to Kiev, there's only one lane here. And so that means unless someone builds a train station in or out of one of those cities, no other player is allowed to build on that route that has already been claimed. You will see on the board some routes have double colors. For example, here, Berlin to Warsaw has both a purple and a yellow option. So if one player builds on the yellow, another player will be allowed to build on the purple. The exception being in 2 and 3 player games, you can only build one route anywhere on the board. For 4 players or 5 player games, both routes become in play. And so there are some options where 2 colors can share the same route. But in this case, if yellow wants desperately to get to Kiev to finish one of their destinations, they would need to build a station on their turn. In order to build your first train station, it simply costs you 1 of the train cards in your hand, any color that needs to be discarded. Each player has, I believe it's 3 or 4 train stations. 3 stations. The second train station costs 2 cards, and the third one costs 3 cards. That being said, these train stations are worth points at the end of the game, so you don't really want to use them unless you're desperate to get into a city that has already been blocked off. So, once again, the 4 options on each player's turn: drawing 2 train cards, either from the face-up pile or face-down, unless it's a locomotive, in which case you're drawing 1. Replenish them as they're drawn. There should always be 5 available. If at any time 3 of these 5 face-up cards are locomotives, before the next player's turn, you will immediately discard those 5 cards, and you'll refresh this face-up grouping of cards with 5 new train cards. So once again, 4 options on each player's turn. The first option is drawing these train cards either from the face-up pile, drawing 2, unless you're drawing a locomotive, in which case you draw 1, or drawing 2 from the face down pile, or a combination of 2 cards face up and face down. Immediately after each card is drawn here, you replenish the face up pile, so there's always 5 available. If at any time this face up pile has 3 locomotives, you immediately, before any other actions are taken, discard those 5 face up and replenish with 5 new cards face up. That's how drawing the train cards works. Claiming routes as well as another option. Cashing in the corresponding colors, either colors or locomotive cards from your hand to claim the correct number of train cars, placing the train cards to show that you have claimed those routes, and don't forget to immediately score the appropriate amount of points based on the size of the route you have claimed on your turn. What we do when we play too, before we do the final scoring of the game, we just review all of the destinations to make sure we haven't missed any of the scoring throughout the course of the game. The third option again is drawing ticket cards. As mentioned, you draw 2 new destination cards and you must keep at least 1 out of 2. And again, the fourth and final option, if desperate to get to a destination, is to place one of these train stations, costing you 1, 2, or 3 cards, depending on if you're placing your first, second, or third. And those cards that you cash in must be a set of the same color to build the stations. So the game continues in that fashion, going clockwise around the table, with each player taking one of those 4 actions available to them on their turn. The game end is triggered when one of the players is down to 2 or less of these train tokens in their personal stock, their personal supply. For example, if I was able to build enough routes and I was the first player down to 2 train cards, I would let everyone know that this is the last round of the game. Everybody around the table then gets 1 more turn, including the player who triggered the last round. So that there's a bit of an advantage to being the first player to trigger that last round, because you will get the last turn. After which, final scoring occurs. And so again, you may want to review the scoring for each color that's been accumulating through claiming routes throughout the course of the game. Also, you will reveal your destination cards at that point, all the destination cards you've accumulated throughout the course of the game, and scoring appropriately for each destination that was completed. You'll score the point value on the card. For each destination that wasn't completed, you will subtract the score value on each card as well. Also, you'll score points for these train stations. Any train station that you didn't put on the board during the course of the game is worth 4 points at the end of the game. Also, there's a special bonus for the player who has the longest continuous train throughout the course of the game, called the European Express. They will get this card at the end of the game, and that gives them a bonus of 10 points. So you score all of those components, and whoever has the largest score at the end of the game is deemed the winner. There are a couple more things I need to explain briefly here throughout the course of the game, and this is unique to the Ticket to Ride Europe version of the game. Those of you who pick up the original Ticket to Ride, the North American version, the gameplay is the same as I've described, except you don't have these train stations. Also, in the original version, all the routes will be sort of simple colors. In the European version, you've got a couple extra wrinkles in claiming routes. You will see some routes. I'll use this route as an example here, Marseille to Roma. You see it is gray surrounded by black. And I should mention, I didn't earlier, that some of the routes are simply this gray color. Anytime a route is a gray color, you can use any color you want as long as you have a set. For example, if I'm going from Venice to Zagreb, it's 2 gray, so I could use 2 pink, 2 green, 2 black, 2 of any color. The gray gives you the option, the flexibility to use any color. But anytime you see a route that is surrounded by a dark black line, that signifies you're building a tunnel. So for example, if I wanted to build from Marseille to Roma, again, it's gray color, so I can use any color I want in my hand. So for example, let's say I wanted to use green. I'm going to announce that I'm building from Marseille to Roma. and I'm going to be using green to do so. The length of this tunnel is 4 train cards, and so I would take and flip over the top 4 cards from the deck. And if any of those 4 cards I flip up are the color that I have chosen to build, in this case green, I have to pay an extra one of that color from my hand. So in this case, I flipped up the top 4 cards. None of them are green, but one of them is a locomotive, which of course is any color. So in this case, it would not merely cost me 4 to build this tunnel to claim this route, but it would cost me an additional 1. So I would have to cash in 5 green, or a combination of green and locomotives in this case. If I don't have 5 in my hand, I simply don't get to do anything that turn. I don't have to get rid of any cards. I simply miss my turn and it goes to the player on the left. So it is a bit of a risk, sometimes a necessary risk, to build those tunnels. And so you want to ensure that possibly you have more than the required value here in the case that some of those colors will be flipped up. Of course, the longer the tunnel, the greater the risk that you'll have to pay more than the base cost on the board. In particular, this track up here, it's 8 long, and so it can get you 21 points when you build it, which is huge, but they're going to be flipping the top 8 cards off the deck, and so be sure you have a contingency plan should the color you choose be flipped up. So that's how the tunnels work. They're scattered around the board. Just be sure and look for the sort of the black outline around them to identify them as being a tunnel. The other special route that you may have to claim from time to time is ferry. Ferry route is anytime you see as part of the route, you'll see the locomotive symbol on them. So for example, here, going from Brindisi to Palermo, it's 3 steps, but one of the 3 has a locomotive symbol on it. That means that at least one of the 3 cards I cash in to claim that route, one must be a locomotive in my hand. I can use more than 1 locomotive, but I have to have at least 1. Of course, down here, you see this longer ferry route here requiring 6 the same color, any color because they're gray, but 2 of the 6 need to be locomotives. So that's how the ferries and the tunnels work. And yeah, that's basically in a nutshell how to play Ticket to Ride Europe. All right, well, that's Ticket to Ride Europe. My personal favorite of the Ticket to Ride family of games. The base game, Ticket to Ride and Ticket to Ride Europe, are probably the 2 most prominent, the 2 most popular. And Ticket to Ride Europe is my personal favorite because it adds the inclusion of the stations and those tunnels and ferries that add a little bit of more depth and tactics and strategy to a pretty good, solid little gateway game. Again, this is a good introductory game. This is not, as you'll see in the next few weeks, my favorite travel game by any stretch, but it is a good game. It's a game that I'll pull out with the family from time to time. It's a game that we'll introduce to friends who are just new to the hobby. It's a good one to introduce them to games beyond sort of the monopolies that maybe some of them grew up with. So let me give you my report card for this particular game, as I typically do. First of all, the theme. This one in particular, this might be just a personal bias, but the Ticket to Ride Europe version we picked up a few years ago as we were planning, back when we were allowed to travel widely, we planned a summer trip to Europe. And so the theme became a little more exciting than it maybe would have been for most because we were in the midst of travel planning, going to some of the cities in this game. So we played this game a lot as our excitement was growing for that summer travel trip that we took. It's a good theme. It's not the most immersive of themes, but it does give you that feel as you're moving around Europe. It's nice to be able to talk about some of the cities or countries if you've been to or planning to. And so the theme is solid. I'll give it a B. As far as the aesthetics, for a simple game, you saw it on the table. It's nice to look at. The map of Europe is well laid out. The artwork, the train cars themselves, they're pretty just sort of cheap plastic molds. So it would be nice to have something a little higher quality for those. So it's a good, not great aesthetic value. I'll give it a B. The replayability of this game, this is where this one kind of lacks for me. I can get into this game after a few plays. It kinds to get a little bit stale. Again, it'll sit on the shelf for a while. We'll pull it out once or twice a year, especially when the kids want a simple game to play, or with friends who are new to the hobby. So it is somewhat replayable, but it's not as replayable as many of the others on my shelf. That's my personal opinion. I'll give it a B minus for the replayability. As far as the game flow and game length is concerned, I believe on the box it says 30 to 60 minutes, and that's about right. Again, the more players around the table, up to a maximum of 5, the longer the game will be. And like games I've already mentioned and games I will be mentioning as we get into some more games with deeper complexity, the length of the game is dependent upon how fast people take their turns in a turn-based game like this. But typically most games that we have played are around 45 minutes to an hour, won't go longer than that. So I'll give the game flow and the game length a B. As far as the ease of play, it says ages 8 plus on the board, and I think for the type of game this wants to be, more of an introductory light strategy game for those just getting into the hobby of tabletop gaming, I think the ease of play is good. Certainly, my kids have been playing this game since they were 8 years old and even a little bit younger, and they're able to grab onto it no problem. So this is another one that you might want to look into if you're a family, if you're just getting into the hobby, either the original Ticket to Ride, the North American version, or this version here, the European version. I would recommend specifically for families or those that want a game that's easy to read the rules, easy to understand, easy to get to the table, and off you go. So I would give it a B plus on the ease of play. As far as tactics and strategy, for a lightweight strategy game, there is some thinking. The nice thing about this game is you want to keep an eye on what other players are doing. There's this sort of give and take between how soon do I want to tip my hand, how soon do I want to start claiming routes in the area I want to get the destinations, or do I want to just wait? Do I want to kind of hold off and then accumulate enough cards to make a bunch of routes in my next few turns? Of course, the potential reward is you can claim all those routes while not tipping your hand of where you're going necessarily. Of course, there is risk that while you're waiting and while you're accumulating all those cards in your hand, and this is something I've done before, other players will intentionally or unintentionally take the spots and the routes that you're planning towards. And so there is a bit of tactics and strategy. I mean, certainly you can play defensively. You can be a little nasty in this game too if you want. If you see someone's going for a route, you can block off their routes even if it sets you back in some of your objectives. So there are some tactics, there are some strategy involved, and for a lightweight game like this, it's pretty decent as far as it comes to tactics and strategy. So once again, I'll give it a B for the tactics and strategy. So at the end of the day, I'll give Ticket to Ride. I mean, for what it's trying to be, it's a good solid game. I'll give it a B. A good one to check out if you're a family with children, if you're just getting into the hobby, or you want to keep a couple games on your shelf when you have friends or family over. You don't want to pull out anything too daunting and too heavy to intimidate them if they're new to the hobby. Ticket to Ride, or Ticket to Ride Europe in my case, is a good one to keep on your shelf. So that's a wrap. Thanks for jumping on board and traveling Europe with me today. This is just the first of many in this series we're calling Around the World. And so for the next few weeks, I'll be pulling some other games off the shelf relating to traveling or that take us to far distant lands and have themes of different places around the world, many of which will be a little more strategic, a little more complex than Ticket to Ride Europe was today. So as always, thank you for taking time to join me here at TripAdvisor. You're welcome to like and hey, share this video with those you think might enjoy this particular game. Also in the comments, let me know what are some of the travel theme games that you have enjoyed playing or that you'd like to see reviewed here on this channel. And as always, you can like the video, you can subscribe, click the notification bell, and get notified whenever I produce a new video here at TripAdvisor. Not only my Tabletop Tuesday videos, but as well my Theology Thursday videos and my Film Friday videos as well. So until next time, whatever game is on your table today or this week, I hope you have a great time around the table together. Game on.